Hey everyone, Sean Frangella here for MotionTutorials.net with a Cinema 4D R18 video on the top 5 MoGraph updates for the new version R18. If you're a fan of working with MoGraph Animation in Cinema 4D, then you are going to be excited about some of these new features. There's been a ton of updates to MoGraph for R18, including new effectors, cloner array settings, scaling and weighting options that push the customization of MoGraph Animation even further, and more. Before we get started on the top 5 list for MoGraph updates, I gotta mention the Voronoi fracture. This is my favorite new feature of R18, and it's such a big one that I set up a full separate video covering how to work with this new feature in order to fracture and animate objects. If you want to get the details on that new update, be sure to check out the separate video on that one by clicking that thumbnail. Alright, now that we got that covered, let's get started on the top 5 MoGraph updates. Number 1, the new HoneyComb Array. So the HoneyComb Array is a really cool new mode for a cloner that you can use to create offset and honeycomb patterns with cloned objects like we see in some of these still renders and this animation. And if we take a look at these project files, what it's doing is working similar to our grid array if we had it on one axis, but with the honeycomb array, it's basically taking our clones, putting them on one axis, and then offsetting them by default 50%. So if you have something like a hexagon, they could all snap together. And if we take a look at this animation, that's exactly what we have going on. And then we're using an animating effector to rotate and scale these out. And if we take a look at this second project file, we have something similar going on, but we have it on the y-axis. And this illustrates a little clearer what's happening. So if we typically had a MoGraph cloner just cloning objects on one grid off in the distance, the main thing that's driving this is this orientation and this offset slider. So if we move this around, we can see how it's intersecting them. So it's taking half the clones and offsetting them on whichever axis you have. So let's talk about setting this up from scratch and some cool customization settings. Let's just create a cube. So if we were setting this up and we wanted to clone these cubes, we could go to MoGraph Cloner and hold Alt while we're highlighting cloner with our cube selected, and it's going to clone those cubes. Now, instead of linear or grid array, let's do honeycomb array. And you can see automatically it sets it up along the z-axis and offsets them. So again, this would be if we were doing one grid array, and now you can see what's happening is it's offsetting them 50%. So if we're at 0, this is what we would have before, and 50% is going to perfectly offset them in the middle. So then if we took the size and width down on this, we could get them to snap exactly together. So since this is 10 by 10, if we wanted to do the math, it would be 200 by 200, and then they would be snapped together. So if we did something like 202 by 202, we can see that little line in between those cloned objects. Now, if we turn this up more, we'll get more objects and build this out further. So you can see already what we can do with just a cube, and we can do this with one object clone and use our honeycomb array with our offset to adjust this. Now we could change the orientation as well if we wanted it to be along the X or Y axis. And we can see now this gives us that different look where they're going back in depth, and we could adjust our width and height that way. We also could pop open this little offset and get offset variation moving as well as perpendicular variation if we just wanted to give it a little bit of variation and it to not look uniform. Now let's set this up to actually look like a honeycomb, because that's pretty cool. So if we had just an end side, and that's going to give us our hexagon, and we'll just quickly extrude that so we get a bit of hexagon geometry. We could drop that into our cloner, and boom, there we got our cool cloned hexagons. We could switch this back to the z-axis and zero out these variation parameters. We'll just pull our camera away a bit and just scale this up a bit, and let's just put these at whole numbers so we can see a bit more what we're doing. And there we can see how this nicely snaps together. Now we could do this previously on a grid array using some little tricks with nulls, but being able to do this right out of the gate and set this up is a huge help if you're trying to do something really specific like this and you don't want to spend the time to try to get a grid array and change the counts and add nulls. Number 2, scaling. So here's a typical thing we might use MoGraph for. We got this sphere, a cone, and a cloner. And say we want to clone these cones around the sphere. So we would drop our cone into our cloner And then on our cloner, change it from linear mode to object. And then for the object, we'll drop our sphere in. And then we get these little cones, which look a bit like spikes, cloning at every vertex point, which I'm fine with distributing them that way now. And if we wanted to change the way that they're pointing, we could just go to the cloner, get the transform tab, and I'll rotate these. So it rotates them all pointing out. And it's pretty cool use of cloning, but say we wanted more of these, we could go to our sphere and let's just double the segment. So we'll put this at 48. Now we get a lot, and hopefully you kind of see this problem that it presents. It looks great in the middle, but our spikes at the top are way too big, and this is a problem. Well, now if we take a look at Cloner in the Object tab, there's this new Enable Scaling checkbox, and this is awesome for cases like this, as well as if you just want to really customize your clones. If I enable scaling, you can see right away by default, it's going to scale down the clones at the top as well as the bottom, and they'll be bigger in the middle. And if I open this little tab, we can see we can actually control this. And if we turn back on our lines, we can see that the closer the vertex points, because we're in distribution mode vertex, the smaller these clones are going to be. And if we adjust our scaling, we can turn up or down how much it's scaling those down. So it can be a really cool way to get control of this sort of thing. And if we want to customize it even more, we can adjust this scale spline. So right now they're getting too small at the beginning and too big in the middle. So in addition to taking our entire scale down so we get some of those top ones back, we could then pull this curve up and down and we'll get the middle ones a bit smaller. And we could even command click to make more points if we wanted to really impact these in-between ones where we want them to show and really manipulate the percentages at which this starts to scale this down. So it's a really cool little update and can be really powerful to customize cloned object in lots of different situations. Be sure to remember that enable scaling is there now and test out what it can do in all sorts of MoGraph situations. Number 3, the push apart effector. So the push apart effector is a new effector. If we go to MoGraph Effector, we'll see it right here. And the purpose of this one is to move or push clones away from each other when they start overlapping, and it can be used for a lot of other stuff too. So let's stick with this example, but I'm going to turn off scaling and change it from distribution vertex to surface. So it's just going to scale these little spikes along my surface, and I can make more of them by turning this up. Well, you can see what the issue is here is it's eventually going to start overlapping them, and we can change the random seed to try to get different results. But we're starting to get some issues. So we might like how many we're getting, but we might want to fix this overlapping issue. Well, now if we have our cloner selected, we can go to MoGraph Effector, push apart, and the default strength is going to be way too big. So if we take our strength down, you can see they'll move back onto my object. And this default setting is going to move them off the object based on how big this radius is. So if we take our radius pretty small and adjust the strength, you can see it's moving them. Now, in this case, this isn't that useful. So let's take a look at some of these other modes. By default, it's just going to push the clones away from their source. Let's reset these to the default settings and change this mode from push apart to hide. And we're not going to see anything because our radius is too big. But if we take our radius down, now we'll start to see clones reappear. And basically, if we go down to 0, we'd have all of them. And if we just start to turn this up, now you can see it's going to hide those clones that are intersecting within a certain radius. And if we wanted to do more passes on this, we can turn up our iterations. So it can be a good way to keep our cloner settings the same, but get rid of some clones. We also could scale them apart, which is probably my favorite option for this sort of thing. And if we just reset these and then turn our radius down, what this is going to do is just start to scale those overlapping clones, and we can turn our iterations up. And then if we adjust our strength, we can see it's scaling them down so we get less and eventually no intersection. So this is a really cool way if we wanted to get some randomization and customization on this spiky ball looking thing that we made. And we could do it a little differently by using this push apart effector. Now we could use the push apart effector to do some other cool and pretty creative stuff besides just hiding clones. Here we have another example where we have a 3D icon that I set up that's made of extruded shapes and text, and there's a bend in there. And we're fracturing it with the new Voronoi fracture, which is another really cool feature that I mentioned. And if we do a quick area render of this, we can see that we don't even see the cracks because the pieces are perfectly snapping together. And I have this push apart effector applied to the entire Voronoi fracture. And if I turn that on, you can see it's at the default settings of push apart, but a really small strength of 0.2. And you can see that that just pushes those pieces just a bit. So we start to see those cracks when we render. And we could do some pretty cool stuff on all of our settings if we change our mode from push apart to scale apart. And I'll set this to a strength of like 5. Now you can see it's evenly scaling all of our pieces as we increase our strength. So all the pieces would be sitting where they should be and just scaling down from their center as we adjust the strength. So that can be a pretty cool one. Now, our other options are along X, Y, and Z. And what this is going to do is move the pieces along one axis. And then if I take the strength down, you can see how it's moving. So if we just wanted to take a MoGraph fracture or Voronoi fracture object and just have the pieces move or animate along one axis, we could use this X, Y, or Z settings and do some pretty cool stuff as we adjust the strength, radius, and iterations. So it's a really cool new effector. You can do some really creative stuff with it. Number 4, the Re-effector. So the Re-effector is another new effector under MoGraph Effector. And what this is great for is if you're using multiple effectors and you want to control them all individually or adjust single or multiple parameters of groups of effectors that are all applied to an object. And let's set this up because it'll make a lot more sense once we take a look at some examples. So here I have this fractured object and I have 3 different effectors on it to move things around. I have a plane effector that's just rotating the pieces a bit in one direction, a random effector to move and rotate them, and then a step effector to scale them down. So there's multiple things going on, and say I wanted to have this all explode in this way with this look and then scale it back together. Well, I'd have to do all of them at once or link them together using Espresso. And now what I can do is if I grab our fracture object, which is holding our MoGraph clones, I'll go to MoGraph Effector, Re-effector, and it looks like it undid everything. But if we take a look at this, it has all of the data sets for everything you can do with effectors. So this is really powerful because it's an entire new data set of all the information you could do, and then you can use it in a lot of different ways. So this first example, now that we have multiple effectors on this, if we have this Re-effector at the end, we could just grab that and just animate the strength from 0 to 100 or vice versa. And it's going to take everything that is set up using our default position, scale, rotation, which is all we're using in these plane, random, and step effectors, and let us adjust it. So we could use it to be a catch-all for animating multiple effectors. And we could also check on and off different settings. So this is where it gets really powerful with really controlling your MoGraph animations and manipulating things and customizing it if you have multiple effectors going on and you want to tweak something a little but not have to dig all the way into each of them individually. And if we want to leave our other effectors to be doing the work but just check some stuff on and off, we could do that with this Re-effector too. So if we go to parameter, we could open any of these scale, rotation, and position options. And let's just say we turn off X. So what that's going to do is let everything else be animating, but this won't be catching X. And let's just go turn that back on. Now, another thing we could do is use this as a container to manipulate just one parameter. So if I drop in all these effectors on our Re-effector, you can see they're added at the bottom and it builds up to our initial animation. But if we move the strength, it's not quite turning it on and off. Well, what we can do is say we liked our whole animation, but we just want this one Re-effector to impact our position X. Well, we could take everything that's going into this MoGraph system. So we have the plane, the random, the step effector, all moving things, and maybe we just want to spread them out a little more on X, but again, not go into each one. Well, we could use the Re-effector, apply it to all of our effectors with that setup, and then just change our position X strength amount or our original strength, and we could scale this entire system out on X. So the Re-effector can be a really cool way to manipulate all of your effectors, or take an entire MoGraph system after you've added effectors and adjust individual properties at the end. And if you take a look at parameter, there's a lot of these. So with the different effectors in our MoGraph effector system, we could affect more stuff besides position, scale, rotation. We could impact time, UV transformation, visibility, and then we could use our Re-effector to further adjust and manipulate those properties. It's a really cool little update, and it's really worth taking a look at. Number 5, weight painting. So this is a really cool new update that you can use to really adjust and manipulate which specific clones are being affected by your MoGraph effector. So here we have a pretty straightforward cloner system. We have a cube that's being cloned on a grid array with one axis. So if we were to add any effectors, let's just go to MoGraph plane. It's just gonna move all of them up by default. And if we check on rotation, it's just gonna rotate all of them in the same direction. Well, what if we wanted to do that, but we wanted to apply it only to the edges or have kind of a different pattern? We can do that and really customize which clones are being impacted by an effector by using our new MoGraph Weight Paint Brush. So I'll go to MoGraph and grab that. And that's gonna open up this brush tool. And we can see on the right, there's our strength. And if we start clicking, it's going to change our clones from red to yellow. And the fall off is going to be orange. So we could click and paint. If we want our strength to be higher or lower, we could turn that up over here. If we want our brush to be bigger or smaller, we can press the brackets left and right, and that's gonna scale that up and down. So we could paint the edges and maybe a slash along the center and just grab different areas just to show what's being impacted. Now, this is all being saved on this MoGraph weight map tag. So if we want to apply that to this cloner, all we got to do is go to our plane effector, and for selection, we can drag in this little icon. And now the only areas of this cloner that are going to be impacted are the yellow areas. So if we go to our plane effector, and let's just turn position Y way up so we can see what's happening, you can see that the clones that are yellow are going to be impacted completely by this. The red ones, not at all. And orange, it's going to smoothly transition along based on what's impacted. So you can get an incredible amount of control of which clones are being affected with our weight map. And we could even add more cloners. So I'm gonna add a step effector, and that's gonna scale them. And it's automatically gonna drop that selection in as that weight map. If I delete that, you can see this is what we'd get by default. And then we could just drag in this weight map. And if we wanted a different one for this effector, we could get our cloner again, and with my MoGraph Weight Paint Brush, select it as a tool, or I could go to MoGraph Weight Paint Brush right here. If I need to get that tool back up, I could start painting again. So let's paint a different area just for the sake of discussion, and I'll make this brush really big. And you can see it's made a second selection tag, and on my step effector, I could add that one. So I could even have multiple weight maps in one cloner system on different cloners, and then I could just animate the strength on and off, and you can see how that's driving the movement and animation. So using weight maps in a cloner system is a really cool thing you can do when you are using the MoGraph Weight Paint Brush. It's something totally new for MoGraph and unlocks a lot of potential on what you could do with your animation. So there's lots of MoGraph updates for Cinema 4D R18. It's a massive update to the MoGraph system. There's a lot of stuff you can do with scaling, weight painting, those couple new effectors, the HoneyComb Array, and don't forget about the Voronoi Fracture, which is an entire huge new feature for MoGraph updates for Cinema 4D R18. And if you want to check out more new features for Cinema 4D R18, be sure to check out motiontutorials.net, where I have full breakdowns on all of the new features, including my top 5 new features, MoGraph updates, the new thin film shader, the awesome new Voronoi Fracture, and more new features. And don't forget to check out some of the new Cinema 4D products I have in the online store at motiontutorials.net/store, where you can pick up Cinema 4D templates, lighting and rendering assets, and new packs for 360 Environment Maps Pro, which are packs of 8K environment photos, assets, and Cinema 4D templates to quickly and easily make your 3D scenes look awesome. If you have any questions on this tutorial or any of my other new feature tutorials, be sure to follow me on Twitter. I'm at Sean Frangella, and check out the Facebook page at facebook.com/motiontutorials. I love hearing from fans of the videos and talking about all these new features. And if you want a quick dose of other new features for R18, be sure to check out the other R18 videos I have up on YouTube by clicking on any of those thumbnails that are popping up there now. Thanks for watching. I'll see you at the next video.